Yeah, and it's interesting because I have found over the last few years that I have actually become more compassionate, more open, far less judgmental, more loving, um, more spontaneous, less afraid, less afraid that I was one of those kids that grew up thinking I'm just too weird and I can't share what I really think and feel with anybody because they'll just throw me away. And I think emergency can do that. It can also do the opposite, of course, as we are seeing all over the world, that emergency can make you greedy, can make you nationalistic, can make you think that I got to protect mine, and everybody who's not mine is my enemy, and they should go away or they should die. But it can also do just the opposite. And why I think going to wounded places and making beauty for them and making beauty for the earth is so important is that by doing these simple actions, like doing that brush fence yesterday, we're reminding ourselves that even though we're powerless on a great big cosmic global level, we are not powerless in the moment.
I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. In a time of great planetary emergency and climate disaster, there's probably no better time to connect with Trebbe Johnson, who has a real gift of reconnecting us with Mother Earth. Trebbe Johnson. All right, welcome to another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. And I am pleased to welcome back for a second time Trebbe Johnson, who is a remarkable author and presence, as far as I'm concerned, in what I might call the Reconnection community. We've both been talking just a few moments before hitting the record button. And she, of course, mentions I should speak with you in the first person here. You're here, Trebbe, you're here. And we were just talking about the work that reconnects, and Joanna Macy and Molly Young Brown and Chris Johnstone, a number of people who have worked extensively in that circle that is the work that reconnects. And for me personally, I've long held that word reconnection to be so vital. It seems to address right at the core of what got us into this kind of predicament that we find ourselves in now. And that is, what got us here is that we've disconnected from all the primary sources of meaning in a human life, from deeper self, from each other, from earth, and from soul. And I've got to say, since being introduced to your work, Trebbe, and our first chance to speak with one another, I think about 2 years ago, I've really returned time and again to the core of what I understand your work to be, which is at its core reconnection with the web of life through our connection with Earth, and particularly the rituals, the ceremony that you often lead for people to be able to, well, I'll ask you to put it into your own words in just a moment, but my experience of following along after your writings is that your invitation of your work is to reconnect with ourselves and with each other through our offerings back to the web of life, through the healing of an offering to places that have been harmed, places that we've done some damage to, amongst other things. And so it's with great pleasure that I welcome you back to some time in conversation together. Thank you so much for spending time with me and us here. And we were just again talking before we got going about there seems to be a significant new heightened level of calling of that web of life. There seems to be some threshold or border that we've crossed collectively that is now literally screaming at us for attention. Excuse me. That is screaming at us for attention, whereas before it was a plenty loud voice. Just 2 years ago when we were talking, and then the years before that that sparked you into your work, the voice has been loud, but now it seems louder than ever. And you said you had something that you'd like to recall from just yesterday that was along this track. Would you mind sharing that? And by the way, Trebbe, welcome.
Thank you so much. And I'm so happy to talk to you again. It's a real treat for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, yesterday was a day when I was feeling a lot of sorrow and despair about the state of the world, because of the, in my opinion, insane actions of Donald Trump, and the danger that he's put the whole world into. And also about, and I completely agree with you, I think maybe 2019 was the year when nobody in their right mind could say climate change isn't real. And the fires that are happening in Australia, where I have friends, and the wildlife that's being lost. And then I had a conversation with a good friend whose sister is dying. And I just felt like there's just no way to find joy and happiness and hope at this time. And I have a very mixed relationship with hope anyway, but I felt overwhelmingly sad. And I kept thinking about the world as opposed to the earth, and everything's in trouble. So I went outside, and my husband and I live in northeastern Pennsylvania at the edge of a very small village. We have 5.5 acres. And for years I've been building a brush fence along one side of it. And I just went out and I worked on this brush fence for about 2 hours, picking up branches that had fallen and weaving them in. And there was a raven that was sitting on top of a tall pine tree. And I just felt like the raven was there. The raven knew exactly what it had to say. It was making an announcement. I didn't know what it had to say, but I said, thank you, thank you for being there. There were rabbit tracks in the snow. I thanked the rabbits for being there. There were turkey tracks where they'd scratched to try and find something to eat. And I carried with me that sense of sorrow and heaviness and despair, but it was like, in a way, it was like that brush fence. It was laced in with the beauty, the awareness of what's there, the sense that the snow has fallen and the trees are there and the raven is calling. It's like all I can do is connect with that beauty and meaning in my own life, because in the world and the earth in general, it's so not beautiful and so not meaningful.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Yes, that you are current. you are right up to the moment in what sounds like the flow of these energies in your neck of the woods. It's so interesting to be able to have these conversations with thought leaders like yourself who have been engaged for some time in ways that profoundly affect people's connection with life. And, to return yourself to at least a partial experience of the deep joy that is the experience of being alive at its core, that's no small deal. And what I guess I'm seeing now, in these past few months in particular, is there's a different level of engagement, even by people who have been around this conversation a long time, even those people like perhaps you and me that have a considerable practice of being able to self-regulate, be able to return ourselves to that connection with the web of life, reconnected with a state of being that is something that we want to be going on inside of ourselves. We're consciously inviting that state and able to return ourselves to that state fairly well. What I'm seeing is that there are some events going on now that are really straining our ability to bring ourselves back to that state of being.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what you were describing about yesterday.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I have found over the last few years that I have actually become more compassionate, more open, far less judgmental, more loving, more spontaneous, less afraid, less afraid that I was one of those kids that grew up thinking I'm just too weird and I can't share what I really think and feel with anybody because they'll just throw me away. And I think emergency can do that. It can also do the opposite, of course, as we are seeing all over the world, that emergency can make you greedy, can make you nationalistic, can make you think that I got to protect mine, and everybody who's not mine is my enemy, and they should go away or they should die. But it can also do just the opposite. And why I think going to wounded places and making beauty for them and making beauty for the earth is so important is that by doing these simple actions, like doing that brush fence yesterday, we're reminding ourselves that even though we're powerless on a great big cosmic global level, we are not powerless in the moment. And even though we can't roll back circumstances as they are, we can roll back our response to the moment so that we can choose, instead of grabbing and being stiff and frozen and selfish, we can open and we can be compassionate, we can be creative, we can act in the moment. What we do in the moment can change everything, even though perhaps we can do nothing to change the outside.
Yeah. And I think that's, to be really frank with you, I know that I position myself kind of on the far end. I position myself on the far end of the scale, from perhaps overly hopeful, or some people call it hopium.
That's good.
In a sense of, even denial is somewhere out on that other end of the spectrum. I'm certainly not in the near-term human extinction end of the far end of the other extreme. But I do find myself really committed to what I've been pleased to hear from Extinction Rebellion in their demands of the world, to speak the truth. And I've found that in everything I've read from you, and certainly in everything I've heard from you. And I really appreciate that. There's just a certain level of trying to buffer things, or kind of put a candy coating on the events of the world, that I just find it uh, extraordinarily exhausting to try and continue a conversation. And I just want to acknowledge that you have an extraordinary way of staying so present to what seems to be the core of your work, which is that heartful connection with this, with the joy of being alive, with that the real reality of the deep grief and the deep love and the deep joy that are all woven together in that center of life. So I just wanted to express some appreciation for the way you communicate about what's going on and about the process that you are in your life. I think it's the way you speak and the elements that you bring forth hand in hand, you know, the very tough to look at and the things that we most want, you know, the love and the connection and so on. I just appreciate that you do that with a sobriety and being very straightforward and not losing your heart while doing that.
Well, thank you. And you know, I'm often aware of how, like, I really feel that this work, this path, this calling that I have had to look at the hurts of the earth and love it and make beauty for it. It's something that I've known throughout my whole life, even when I was very small. You know, I grew up with an alcoholic father who would hit my mother and cause chaos. And I found reality in my backyards. I found beauty, but I also found reality. You know, I found a bird hitting itself against the window of a garage when I was holding the garage door wide open for it so it could get out. You know, I found a mouse with its head bitten off, but I found beauty just in flowers, in the way things were. And it was like that helped me to stay grounded in the reality of what was going on in my house. And to know that my father's promises the day after, you know, one of his drunken rages that he wasn't going to do it again were not right.
Yeah.
And so there was that sense of I can be authentic in nature, and it's going to show me both the sorrow and the ugliness and the beauty. And so when I actually got the idea for what became Radical Joy for Hard Times, which is my organization in my last book, when I did a video about a man from the Oneida Nation more than 30 years ago. And something he said to me, which was his realization that the waste is an orphan from the circle of life. It just grabbed me. And I spent many, many years looking at people like, you know, Joanna Macy's work and Daniel Dancer's work and Lily Ye's work and asking myself, what can I do with this to make it relevant to people today? So that was long before we were worrying about climate change or gas fracking or, you know, any of the things that we're really worried about now. So for me, it's just been a calling all along to find a way to say, how can we really look at the darkest places of what surrounds us, both within and without, although my focus is on the without, but it happens in the within as well. And how can we love that and give back to it and say, in a way, it's like saying to the earth, I suffer and I perceive you as suffering. And on my logical mind, I know you're not mourning yourself, but I mourn you and I mourn what's happening to you. And let me just give you a gift of consolation and thanks and appreciation. And I can make it out of whatever is there. I don't need to bring anything in. I don't need to be an expert. I don't need sage. I don't need this or that or the other thing. The earth provides everything I need in order to make a gift for her at that place. So I mean, in a sense, I find myself really kind of lucky, really lucky to be born at this particular time. And I think all of us who are doing the work that we're doing now, like you and Carolyn Baker and Jim Bendel and Joanna and I'm just Molly Young Brown. You know, all of us, what we're doing is we're really lucky because we happen to be born with this kind of sensibility that gets the reality of what's going on now and says, this is where I really need to step up, because this is something that comes out of the wellspring of me.
Yeah. Yeah. I have two tracks that I hope we can get to in this time together. One is probably just the next notch of what you've just been talking about. The calling of the times, how we're responding, the various people that you just listed, and your own reactions recently to the next wave of, oh my gosh, this is happening. How do I hold this? And then being in nature, being in the process and in the space that you're now so familiar with in your own self-regulation practice. I noticed that I've been challenged recently at a scale that has really only happened a few times in the years that I've been involved with this work of providing support and resources for people who are aware or collapse aware. I've been an ocean person most of my life. Like you were talking about your backyard, my backyard, so to speak, has always been the ocean. And ever since I saw my first Jacques Cousteau TV special, I realized this is the magic of the earth. This is where the beauty and the magic lives. And to this day, I am just so deeply grateful for his expressions and so on. I just about a week ago, I was made aware of an article from the Atlantic magazine in which there was a very long article about how there are a number of different companies that are doing or planning on doing very soon large scale ocean mining at a scale that will immediately become the largest mining operation that the world has ever seen, larger than anything that has ever happened before.
Wow.
And without going into too much of the detail, it literally dropped my jaw. I'm in this kind of conversation every day, and it's rare that I'm just stopped in my tracks. Because when I add that to the things that are already well known, they're just not debated, they're not in question, like so much of the stuff around denial of climate change and so on. You know, that we're looking at the collapse of the global fisheries and the collapse of all the world's coral reefs by 2050. And then to also have lost approximately 50% of the phytoplankton in the ocean since you and I were born. And phytoplankton happen to provide more than 50% of the world's oxygen. And you know, just these pieces added up recently in this last week. And I'm curious, this is a long-winded, really just a request to look together. And I'm just asking if you might have any suggestions from your perspective, how a person can start to expand to hold things of this scale, because this is only one of God knows how many global scale events of this type that are occurring. I'm curious if you have any suggestions for the expansion of one's capacity to stay present in the first place, that self-regulation part that I was talking about, but also expand, you know, crack open my heart in an intentional and good way to be able to hold the next scale of expansion of this type of news.
Mhm.
I'm just curious if you have any notions, any thoughts, any experience to relay, because that's where I find myself, and I'm on the middle of this path.
Well, I mean, I have few different thoughts that are not necessarily connected to us.
Oh, fine. Yeah.
One is that I came across an article years ago when I was writing the Radical Joy for Hard Times about a biologist in Hawaii who was so sad about how all the native species are disappearing because of invasives, animals and plants. And he talked about doing hospice care for the earth, which he did not mean that in a cheerful way. He meant that he was quite despairing about this. And yet I thought, well, really, that is the work of so many of us now, is to do hospice care for the earth. And again, we can be so, and I myself, maybe once or twice a day, I feel so overwhelmed by the immensity of whatever it is. I mean, it's not always even the same thing. I could get in despair about the oceans in the morning, and then in the afternoon it's the wildfires in Australia or whatever. And it's like, for me, the way I want to do hospice care for the earth, that's what I want to do. I want to do hospice care for the earth. I want to sit by the bedside of the earth and say, I love you. I appreciate your beauty and whatever I can find of it.
Yeah.
I don't want to ever miss a chance to notice something beautiful. I want to make gifts for you, earth, place, ocean, and just and also treat other people as I treat the earth. I mean, I think for what Radical Joy for Hard Times is all about, and for the work that I want to do and do about finding and making beauty for wounded places, is that all of the things that I suggest and that we suggest in the organization have been applied to human beings, but we can apply them to the earth. What I just said, sit with the earth and hold her hand. So in other words, go to that ocean and allow the thoughts to be about your sorrow and your grief and your outrage, and then just be with the ocean, and
Mm-hmm.
and know that you can't fix it, but also to see what the waves are doing and the sand is doing and what your own heart is doing and who's in your life and who's there on the beach and what else they're doing, and then make beauty. Make a gift for the earth out of the sand, out of shells, even out of rubbish that you might then take out. And to me, so we do with Radical Joy for Hard Times, we have a day every year in June called the Global Earth Exchange. And it happens around the time of the summer solstice. And we invite people all over the world to go to wounded places that they care about, share their stories, spend time getting to know the places it is now, and to make a gift of beauty for it. And so every year we have these events happening from all over the world, and it might be for a historic site that a roadway is going through in England. It might be a forest in Bali where all the clove trees are dying because they've had ceaseless rainstorms for the last few years. It might be a site in West Virginia where there's mountaintop mining. And we suggest that people make a bird because birds are universal, and they make a bird out of found materials, and sticks, stones, sand, tree limbs, people, and birds are also a sign of, birds sing. No matter what's going on in the world, birds sing. And so that's our Radical Joy for Hard Times symbol. And what is so extraordinary is that when you do these simple acts, it just transforms people. And over and over and over again, people write to us after they've done this Global Earth Exchange, and they say, I can't believe it. I went to this place. Maybe my friend wanted me to go, but I didn't really think it was such a great idea to go and stand in front of a Superfund site. But we did it, and we shared stories, and then we made this act of beauty. And then they say, I ended up falling in love with this unlikely place. So in answer to your question, I mean, I think when my mind starts going out there, and it does, I have to just bring it back to what I can do in the moment, and to really look for beauty. I mean, to me, that's the answer. I just I just finished writing an essay that's going to be in the online publication, Minding Nature, later on in a few months. And it's called Beauty Might Just Save the Earth, or at least your life on Earth. And I really believe that finding and making beauty is the thing that's going to keep us alive in the hardest of times. And and it's no accident, really, coming to think of it, whenever there is some kind of a disaster, whether it's a human-made disaster or a, quote, natural disaster, the news media always wants to find examples of people who are behaving in ways that are generous and heroic and kind, because that's what we all need. We need to hear those stories and think, well, maybe I can be one of those people too, who steps beyond, who does something that's bigger than I think I can do, on behalf of a greater calling than sticking, again, being quiet and silent and isolated. So I think we just have to keep it simple. We have to go from the large to the small. We have to go from the global to our own backyards. And when we do these global earth exchanges, sometimes people would say, can I just meditate on the place? And my opinion is it's important to go to the place, because that's how we connect with the reality of what's happening.
Yeah, beautiful.
The spirit of the place.
Yeah. I've mentioned a particular kind of tough spot that I've been in recently, and some of the elements that are living in that little tough spot at the moment. And I'm curious, you obviously are very aware of what's going on. And I'm curious if there are any small handful of concerns that really just seem to float to the top for you, that really have your attention from time to time. Basically, I'm curious, what are your greatest concerns at the moment in terms of either the human systems of the world or the earth systems of the world? What has your attention?
I have a lot of concerns about both. I mean, I live in northeastern Pennsylvania in Susquehanna County, where there's a lot of gas fracking. And I feel that, I worry about the earth itself, be above and beyond the toxicity of it and the truck traffic and the way it's making people make bad decisions, in my opinion, just to get money. But I also worry about the insanity of drilling for more fossil fuel when we're already destroying ourselves through it. I worry about things that I read about. Right now, I'm worried a lot about, and thinking and reading a lot about the fires in Australia. Last summer, I was thinking a lot about the fires in California, because I have a lot of friends there. Now, I think about the oceans. I do scuba diving, and I haven't been scuba diving in maybe 6 or 7 years, and I feel very sad about the death of the coral. And I feel grievously sad about what I really feel is the demise of the United States as we grew up knowing it, with our present, quote, leadership, and it just seems the absolute reluctance of so many people to say, this is wrong, this is immoral, this is undiplomatic. I mean, I just can't understand how people can. I mean, if they're really not going against their own better judgment, and they really think what they're doing is okay, then it's even worse. So So I worry about, like I said, I've been thinking a lot lately about the difference between the world, which seems to me to have to do with politics and uh, and, and leadership in countries, nationalism, treatment of immigrants. I mean, it just breaks my heart what's happening to people trying to get into this country.
Yeah.
Children being separated from their parents and kept in cages. Um, and then so there's the world being in danger, and then there's the earth being in danger. And to me, the earth is this being that has been evolving and growing and changing for 4.5 billion years. And here we are, this generation that is causing the demise of our planet, and we're stuck in this downfall and making changes so slowly.
Hmm.
So I worry a lot. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I worry. I do not live in a world where everything is joyful. And I might just mention this. So I was on a book tour last year when my book came out, and people would often say, oh, the name of it is Radical Joy for Hard Times. How do we replace the hard times with the joy? And I had to say, I don't think you can. I think we live in an age where you have to say, they're both they're both with me. And it's and I, like I was describing with that, creating that brush fence yesterday and seeing the raven and the rabbit tracks. To me, it's like holding the sorrow and the joy and the ugliness and the beauty as if they were feathers in my two hands, balancing them and saying, I don't have to choose. I don't have to say it's all bad and I'm going to go there. Or I don't have to say, none of it's bad. There's hope. Everything's going to be fine. We're all going to pull through.
Right.
It's both. It's the beauty and the joy. And I think if we stay sane, if we can acknowledge that and hold it and recognize that it's almost like it's a life jacket.
Yeah. Really well said. I so appreciate your perspective weaving those together. I'm curious, on the other side of the coin, from what concerns you, I'm curious if there are any bodies of work, any authors, any agencies, any groups, any artistic ventures that inspire you, that you see some possibility, particularly in the human systems concerns you were just talking about. Are you seeing anything or anyone that offers you some sort of inspiration or hope of reconnection? Who's doing good stuff?
Lots of people. I mean, you're doing good stuff with your work and your books. Carolyn Baker's doing good stuff. Judy Todd with Nature Connect Northwest in Portland is doing great stuff to bring people back into nature and connect with them. Joanna Macy has been a huge inspiration to me. Lily Ye works in all kinds of troubled areas, including Rwanda, to help people in communities that have suffered enormously to make beauty there. And we've mentioned Jem Bandel and Extinction Rebellion, and just the amount of attention that so many people are paying on trying not just to do the practical things of taking care of the world, like building permaculture gardens, and making schools. Like, where did I read about schools? Was it in Indonesia? I can't remember. They're building schools on barges, so that if the water rises, the kids will still have a way to go to school. I mean, that's just brilliant. And as far as local politics and the situation of the world, I've recently gotten involved with a group called Unity Earth that is trying to bring together uh, people of various spiritual traditions around taking care of the earth. They're a wonderful group, a very diverse, wonderful group of people.
Mm.
So I think it's going on. And the good news is that this crisis has brought out a lot of alternative ways of thinking and trying to address these issues in unconventional ways, in ways that change us, not just change the way we do things in the world, but how we think and respond and react to one another.
Mm. Yeah, good. I'm glad you had an extensive list. I'm appreciating that. So you've mentioned.
I want to mention one book that it's a book that I read. It's called Visit Sunny Chernobyl. Visit Sunny Chernobyl. The author is, I believe his name is Blackwell. And he went to some of the most troubled places on the planet and found beauty in them. And like, he went to Chernobyl, he went to the most polluted city in China. He went out and tried to take a boat through the great whirling garbage mass in the Pacific Ocean, down into the Gulf of Texas. It's just a wonderful book. And he has great stories about how people in extremely difficult circumstances survive and get together and make art.
That sounds like somebody I should talk to on this show.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. It's a wonderful book.
Yeah, great. Well, you mentioned that you have an article coming up, and I made a note of, and I'll be including as much of this as I can put together in the show notes for this particular podcast. You mentioned your article coming up in Minding Nature. You have you got another book on the way?
I'm working on it, but I can't really talk about it yet because
That's fine.
I'm putting it together, but it will be like a follow-up of Radical Joy for Hard Times. And I will say this, it ties in a bunch of ideas of the existentialists of the 60s and 50s, who I think have a lot to teach us about today in a new way. And so it does work on those themes a bit.
Beautiful. Beautiful. We'll look forward to that. And you also mentioned that you have an annual event that you more or less sponsor or make well known through your website, and it sounds like kind of an alliance that you have going on, that people can contact that, and of course put your website information in the notes as well. I think you mentioned your trip to Bali that you've been doing for quite some time. Would you like to just share a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I went to Bali for the first time with my husband in 2004, and I had read a lot about it, and I was so fascinated by the people and the culture that I just decided I had to create a small trip so I could keep going back and keep learning about it. It's the most beautiful culture, and I do this little trip every year. The next one is March 2nd and to 12th, and there's still places available. Actually, it's maybe anyway, it's around that time. I don't have exact dates. And we don't do the things that tourists often do in Bali because it's a small group, and because I have a lot of friends there now, we're able to go to ceremonies like, rites of passage ceremonies, and ceremonies for the village temple, and ceremonies to honor the shadow puppets. The people have a way of living that is very, where nature and spirituality and family and ceremony and community and art are all intertwined. Mm-hmm. And they've managed to withhold their traditions, their language. It's the only Hindu island in all of Indonesia, where there are something like 17,000 islands.
Yeah.
And I've learned to speak a bit of Indonesian over the years. So it's a really great trip, and it's very intimate because there's only 4 of us. Wow. And this year we're going to go to some wounded places with some of my friends. We're going to go to that clove forests I mentioned earlier, where they clove farmers haven't been able to grow their cloves in the trees because the rain knocks the blossoms off. And we're going to go to also a site near one of Bali's most sacred temples, which is the sacred temple of the south called Tanalot. And Trump wants to build a multi-million-dollar hotel right nearby. So we're going to go to that and one other place as well.
Trebbe, I tend to get into a particular groove with folks like yourself who have so much to share and have been really crafting your own practices and your body of work for quite some time. And we get to a particular level of familiarity and can talk about issues at a pretty high level of sensitivity, like to what's going on, awareness of what's going on, and also being able to blend our bodies of work with that. And what I'd like to do is just kind of step back from that level for a few moments, because I think there are going to be, and especially in 2020, there are going to be quite a bit larger, there's going to be quite a bit larger audience of people who are fairly new to this idea of, first, that there's any sort of real trouble going on the planet. You know, in other words, the collapse of Earth and human systems is new to them. And the scale of it is new. And sometimes that can be pretty overwhelming if they don't have the practices, if they don't have the familiarity, if they don't have the experience of being able to crack our heart open intentionally and have that be a beautiful thing, have that be a real invoking of love and joy that you've been talking about. And I'm curious if you would mind taking a few moments to speak with folks who are newer to this kind of awareness and engaging, and they want to start to bridge into this ability that you've been describing so beautifully of being able to hold the beauty and also the ugliness of the world and also the sorrow of the world, and be able to weave them together and stay present to each, perhaps equally, in the process of just walking through our day. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about what you've seen, especially in the first few steps in your path that got you to here. Can you share a little bit about the early steps there?
Yeah, I love that question. So I would make a few suggestions.
Please.
Look for beauty. Especially look for it in nature. Look for it in the sunrise. Look for it. And when you see it, notice that you're seeing it, right? Don't just look away. Another thing is, when you pass a place, either by walking or driving or whatever, in the physical world, or even on a newspaper, stop and pause there. If a place that's hurt, a place that's damaged, pause there for a minute. And, just like greet it. If you pass an animal on the road and you're driving and the animal's been run over, you just sort of like bow and say, I'm sorry. So stop and allow yourself to acknowledge these hurt places, and allow yourself to acknowledge your own sense of sorrow and despair about it. You don't have to stay there. In fact, it's not a good idea to stay there. Another thing is that what's really helped me a lot is to recognize that everybody I meet has struggled and is suffering and desires love and compassion and the best for those that they also love. So it's like seeing that everybody inside of them has a spark, and refraining from judging. I live in a community, for example, where there's more Republicans than Democrats. There's more non-environmentalists than environmentalists. But there's so much beauty in just about everybody, and I try and find it. I try and find that in people that aren't like me. and make beauty for the earth. Go outside and just, spend 5 minutes making something out of flowers or stones or sticks, a bird, a mandala, an image of something that you care about. Sing a song to the earth. Pray for the earth. Pray for the places you love. Thank the earth, Thank anything that you see that it's beautiful. You can thank it. A thing that I have been saying for probably 50 years when I see these moments of beauty is I just say out loud, thank you for inviting me into this moment. It's like it's my mantra. Thank you for inviting me into this moment. Wow, I get to see this at this time. I said it this morning. I got up early and I saw this pale pink sky coming up in the darkness. I said, thank you for inviting me into this moment. So these are just a few things. It's about taking these small steps and acknowledging that, like I was saying earlier, we have the joy in one hand and the beauty, and in the other we have the sorrow. And all we can do is keep on making these small actions. And if we can make them with our friends and our neighbors and our community, so much the better. But we always have the opportunity of making them for ourselves. And no matter what's going on in the world, we have the power to make these changes in ourselves at any moment of any day.
I really, I so appreciate you taking the time to share these last few things. I've got one of the side projects of this particular body of work is a recent addition. It's a series of interviews with collapse-aware parents.
Yeah.
And it's called Take My Hand, Conscious Parenting in a Time of Stolen Dreams. And more often than not, maybe it's about half and half. Half of these parents are entirely new to the whole notion of the collapse of systems. It's brand new, and it's literally blowing their minds. Like it can have a really shocking effect. The other half are very well resourced. They've been at this conversation quite a while, and they integrate these resources and these self-regulation practices into their family. So I'm so appreciating what you just shared, these suggestions for the folks that are new to this conversation, that just all it looks like is a binary of deep resignation and we're so screwed, or somehow stay in denial and float on top of everything. I believe that the kind of suggestions you were just offering allow us to bridge and to land somewhere in between, in a more sober place, in a more present place. So yeah, thanks for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome. That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And we're all in this together, and it's a tough road, and we have to have a lot of compassion for one another. Yeah. More than I think we're going to be tested. We have to have more compassion than we even thought was possible.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your work, and Trebbe, your generosity of spending some time with us this morning. I just look forward to hearing about whatever the next book will contain. I wish you great beauty and wonderment in Bali coming up. And thank you again so much for your commitment to this deep reconnection that you do, that you invite others to. It's a gift. It's so simple, but so profound. I really appreciate your work.
Thank you so much, Dean, for inviting me. And I so appreciate your work and what you're doing, and the way that you're bringing consciousness and ideas and relief to people. Those three things are really important.
Mm-hmm. Well, you take good care of yourself.
You too.
I look forward to the next time.
Me too.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, Produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.